Hey everyone. Welcome to this special live stream of Transit News. So we're gonna start off with a series of audio that we are going to listen. We're going two important topics that affected New York City this past week. One of them is the L train shutdown, and the second, Fair Fares campaign that some people, including groups from the elites, fought for, but they fell short. But first, let's start off with the L train shutdown, or like we're going to call it, the L train saga. First, we learned last week, surprisingly, New York Governor Andrew Mark Cuomo decided out of the blue to cancel a 3+ year uh, shutdown project that was planned since the now COO and formerly New York City Transit President Ronnie Hinckham planned, among others, inside the MTA. But the governor decided to go outside the MTA world, outside the usual consultants, and look for consultants within Columbia and Cornell University. So, first, my apologies. This live stream will be pretty long, and let's first, both of these audios will be from the Brian Lear show. The first will be our one of our beloved transit reporters, Washington Heights' own Emma Fitzsimmons, talking regarding the L train shutdown. So let's take a listen.
It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone. More now on Governor Cuomo's bombshell announcement yesterday that he is scrapping the 15-month L train shutdown.
15 months sounds like a relatively short period of time. It's not. They're doing it one day at a time, trying to get to work.
The shutdown, which was set to happen this April, would have affected at least 275,000 riders who rely on the train to get between Brooklyn and Manhattan. This was in the works for 3 years. Remember, there was a public selection process for which of two kinds of shutdowns people find less painful. And let's face it, in anticipation of the L-pocalypse, Elmageddon, many folks who live along the train line, those who could afford to, moved from their neighborhoods, even changed jobs. Landlords renegotiated rents downward and more. Do they all get to go back where they were? No. So now, joining me now to discuss this unexpected turn of events is New York Times transit reporter Emma Fitzsimmons. Hi, Emma. Welcome back to WNYC.
Good morning.
So where did this bolt from the blue come from at the last minute?
Well, last month Governor Cuomo told us all that he was touring the L train tunnel himself. He wanted to see if there were fresh ideas, and even the governor said this morning, hey, I thought we were going to stick with the original plan. But it turns out these engineering experts told him there was a different way. He worked with the MTA on this, and then yesterday there was this surprise announcement saying the L train shutdown is off. And this morning there's sort of a new development where the governor said, you know what, this actually needs approval by the MTA board, and I don't know what they're going to do. So there's even sort of more confusion today about what's going to happen.
So that's breaking news this morning. The governor says this plan is his proposal and it needs approval by the MTA board. Remember yesterday, he was announcing it as a done deal, wasn't he?
Yes, he stood in front of cameras and, the MTA chairman said the apocalypse is over. I asked him at yesterday's press conference, what about the MTA board? And the governor said, I don't believe we need their approval. Today, he said he's calling for an emergency MTA board meeting, and they'll have to say yay or nay on this proposal.
Is there any possibility that they will say nay, or do we just conclude that this is all a charade and he really controls the MTA board anyway?
The board usually goes along with what the MTA recommends and what the governor stipulates. But as you know, the MTA board is made up of a bunch of different representatives, including several members from the mayor. And so it's not clear what's going to happen. I think usually the MTA board does go along with the MTA's decisions. But this has added a new wrinkle as people are trying to make decisions for their lives.
Is there any pushback to this plan at all? I mean, it seems on the surface like unambiguously good news. Is there any pushback? Is there any opposition?
There was a lot of opposition yesterday. I know to L train riders, it may just seem like, oh, this is obviously a good decision. But yesterday, everyone from the Brooklyn Borough president to Melissa Mark-Viverito to transit advocates were all saying, wait, hold your horses. Is this really the best option? This technology is unproven. How much is it going to cost? What about all these plans we've been making? And is this a sure thing, or is this sort of some new untested technology?
So on the technology, here's the governor yesterday.
They have proposed a new design to use in the tunnel. It is a design that has not been used in the United States before, to the best of our knowledge. It has been implemented in Europe. It has never been implemented in a tunnel restoration project. They came up with that design suggestion. It uses many new innovations.
So they, which he kept saying in that clip, refers to some European experts. Who are these people?
Well, the team yesterday that stood beside him in this announcement are people from Cornell and Columbia universities. These are outsiders, not people from within the MTA. The governor said that this technology had been used in London, Hong Kong, and Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. But he even admitted this morning it's still very new. But this is part of his whole effort to sort of shake up the MTA and get them to think differently. But there is some concern about whether this is a sure thing.
Has it been, or have you been able to learn where it has been used before? Maybe it's worth reminding people of exactly what the repair is supposed to be on the L train subway tunnel, and go into a little bit of the detail about how these engineers propose to do it differently that wouldn't require a shutdown.
Sure. So the tunnel was flooded during Hurricane Sandy in 2012, and a lot of the salt water sort of got into the electrical equipment and the cables that run through the tunnel. So the original plan that would have led to a 15-month shutdown would have scraped out all of the bench walls where the cables are held and sort of rehabilitated the entire tunnel, replaced all the equipment, and done it in one 15-month shot. Now these engineers are saying that you can use a different technology. It's sort of technical, so bear with me, but right now they use bench walls, which are these concrete walls on the side of the tunnel, and the cables run through there, but they're very labor intensive to reinstall, and what he's asking for now is called a racking system. Essentially, you take these very important cables and put them up on a rack on the side of the tunnel wall, and so they're not buried beneath this bench wall, they're sort of just hanging there on the wall. And so he says this racking technology has been used in other cities before, but not in the U.S. And so it would make quite a bit of difference. You wouldn't have to go in there and do heavy construction to rip out the bench wall. You could just move the cables up and do the work sort of here and there piecemeal on nights and weekends.
Is it going to cost a different amount of money than the original plan?
So I asked the governor yesterday, the MTA board approved a contract with two set of contractors for $477 million. And I said, what happens to that contract? And the MTA board chair says, well, we'll renegotiate it. He said it would cost that same number or less. And the governor said less. He says it's less work to do, so the cost should come down. But one of the things we're looking into today is what happens to all the plans that have been started, right? The work was supposed to start in April, and so there's been, as you mentioned, 3 years of planning. What types of costs have already been sort of sunk into this project and now need to be renegotiated? And can this contractor, Judlow, they've been criticized a lot in the past. Can they handle this work? The governor said they could, but the Brooklyn Borough president said yesterday that he met with the MTA and was briefed on all of this, and he said he left with more questions than answers. And so I do think, this morning the governor hopped on the phone with reporters and tried to answer some of those questions, and we're still trying to figure them out ourselves.
So the MTA hired contractors to do the work a certain kind of way. The governor swoops in with these European engineers and proposes an alternative that's never been implemented in a tunnel restoration project, as the governor said himself, and expects this contractor that's never done this kind of work to just turn on a dime and do it this way. Am I understanding this correctly?
Yes, and this morning in the conference call with reporters, the main question was essentially, why did you wait so long to get involved? The governor says he met a constituent in Brooklyn near the end of his campaign for a third term, and this person said, Governor, what's happening with the L train? Have you personally inspected it yourself? And really sort of put the fear of God into him about what this would mean for people who live in Brooklyn. And so the governor's interest in this project really just came recently, and now it has a new approach.
And have the contractors weighed in publicly? Are they wary of implementing an untested system?
I'm going to reach out to them today. Usually contractors sort of don't speak out on their own because they're very cognizant of wanting to make the MTA happy. There's only a certain, a dozen number of contractors who work on MTA projects in New York, so they want to have a cooperative relationship and do what the MTA wants them to do.
And listeners, we're going to open up the phones for you on this apparent cancellation of the L train shutdown for 15 months starting in April. Listeners, did you make any major life changes in preparation for the L train shutdown? Did you move? Did you quit your job? Are you a landlord who renegotiated rents downwards with your tenants because they demanded it in order to stay? Give us a call, 212-433 WNYC. Any engineers out there? Do we happen to have, you never know, it's a needle in a haystack. Do we have any subway tunnel engineers out there or anybody else with a professional eye on this? 212-433-9692 for Emma Fitzsimmons, transit reporter for the New York Times. And Emma, I just want to be as clear as we can, because frankly, I'm a little confused after what the governor said this morning about the MTA board and what you just said about the amount of skepticism that there is from the Brooklyn Borough president and former city council speaker. Is this gonna be? I mean, do you have a level of confidence now, from what you know, reporting this story, that this is actually going to go forward in this new way, or are we on day one of a new debate about whether the MTA board should vote to approve this change?
That's a good question. I'm following up with the governor's office and the MTA today to try to answer that question. I think there will be more debate about which option is the best option. So it's not clear, whether the governor sort of jumped the gun and said it's off, and it's sort of in the hands of the MTA board at this point.
The new alternative plan would keep regular L train service on weekdays, as I understand it, and close one of the train's two tubes on nights and weekends. So when would that start, and what would the night and weekend disruption be like?
So the MTA chair said yesterday that it would start around the same time as the earlier work, so around April 27th, but that's another big question, right? When can they sort of get this thing started? And then in terms of service, they said, I believe, I have to go back and check my notes, but every 20 minutes, trains would run on nights and weekends because the tunnel has two tubes. One tube would be closed at a time for the work, so there would be less frequent service on nights and weekends, and that's been a point of criticism as well, because, you know, a lot of low-income workers who work shifts work nights and weekends, and those people will be more inconvenienced than like your 9-to-5 commuters.
Let's take a phone call. Robert in Queens, you're on WNYC. Hi, Robert.
Good morning. Brian. Happy New Year.
Same to you.
I've been listening to this the program this morning about the MTA and what's going on. And, you know, I'm one of those workers that end up having to lose a job because of the inconsistency of the trains. I mean, and I'm here in Queens. There were nights that it took me 2 and 3 hours to get back here from Midtown. And it's not only the L line, and I live on the L line. It's not only the L line, it's the other lines also, because it's like a cascading effect. When one goes down, they all go down. And then I don't have the money to go Midtown to Queens. It's like $50, $60, you know?
I hear you.
Where you're from. And in addition to that, this was mentioned when they started talking about the close for the airline. People were talking about maybe you should close it. You know, I think you had a show on it when people were talking about closing it at night and 1, 2.
Yes.
And all of a sudden they were saying they couldn't do that. So I don't understand it.
May I ask a little bit more of your story? I'm curious. What was the relationship between the anticipated shutdown and you losing your job? Did some employer decide because of this coming L train shutdown that they didn't need as many workers anymore?
That, and also the fact that a lot of us were stuck making a choice of trying to leave work at a time when you could catch a train. So if the train stops at 12 o'clock and you're in Midtown, and you go from Midtown to, let's say, 14th Street, you couldn't get a train. Then you have to get a bus.
Right.
And if you will get upstairs and you get a bus, you wait for the bus, and the bus could take 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And you still haven't even gotten to Brooklyn. You're doing Manhattan. What happened was...
Go ahead.
So what happened was, after a while, I just couldn't afford to be taking an Uber or a cab. I couldn't afford that, so I ended up saying, you know what, I have to make a choice. I can't do this.
What would you like to see the MTA or the government do?
Right now, I'd like some answers. I like my job back. That's not going to happen. But I'd like clear answers. It's not brain surgery. Clear answers. Come to the people and say, this is what's going on. Because people are talking about, the governor's saying that he talked to some people in Europe, and now he's got a new way of doing it. Well, that's crap, because we know that they have people talking about doing it this way.
Robert, thank you so much, and good luck to you. I wish we could help you more.
Thank you.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC will continue on the question surrounding the possible cancellation of the L train shutdown with Emma Fitzsimmons, New York Times transit reporter, and more of your calls right after this.
Next time on the New Yorker Radio Hour, author and activist Janet Mock on growing up transgender in Hawaii.
The fact that, the Department of Education hired a trans woman, like my everyday life was changed and shifted. I didn't have to look to Law and Order or Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, or Silence of the Lambs to see trans people represented.
Janet Mock, next time on the New Yorker Radio Hour. Tomorrow morning at 10 on 93.9 FM, WNYC.
WNYC is supported by the Ensemble for the Romantic Century, presenting Maestro, a new play with music starring John Noble as conductor Arturo Toscanini in his struggle against fascism. Begins January 3rd at the Duke on 42nd Street. Tickets at romanticcentury.org. The Jerome L. Green Foundation, helping to keep the arts affordable and accessible for audiences across New York City.
At WNYC, we rely on listener support.
But what exactly does that mean? I'm Cindy Rodriguez. Listener support means you're a part of us. Every time you hear something great on WNYC, it's because your contribution made it happen. Without your support, it doesn't happen. It's a fundamental partnership at the heart of everything we do. Show your support. Go to WNYC.org and click on donate.
Coming up on Monday's Brian Lehrer Show, Congresswoman Nita Lowey, the New York Democrat who represents New York's 17th district, parts of Westchester and Rockland. She is the new chair of the House Appropriations Committee, which means, among other things, that wall funding runs through her. So Congresswoman Nita Lowey from Westchester and Rockland with new power on Monday's Brian Lehrer Show.
This is WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820, NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC as we're trying to make sense of Governor Cuomo's announcement yesterday that the L train shut down for 15 months, scheduled to start in April for repairs won't be necessary after all, but then announcing this morning that the MTA board is going to have to sign off on this, and apparently there is some opposition, according to our guest, New York Times transit reporter Emma Fitzsimmons. Let's take another call from somebody who thinks he's got some technical expertise to help us understand what this alternative plan is about. Dan in Sleepy Hollow, you're on WNYC. Thank you so much for calling in.
Sure. Hello. Now, the salt water has penetrated the concrete. It messes up the concrete. There's going to be a lot of concrete that needs to get replaced. So now it sounds like they're going to shortcut a lot of that work and not do that. So, we're going to end up, down the road having to redo stuff. I mean, and also it's like they had this plan to redo. They were going to reline the entire tunnel, and now they're not going to do that probably. I mean, so basically, we could have gotten a whole new tunnel out of this basically, and now we're going to end up with some half job.
Dan, thank you. Emma, is he the only person asking that question in roughly that way?
There's other concern that this could be sort of a patch job, that this is more piecemeal, whereas the original plan would have been a more thorough reconstruction that could have lasted longer.
Paul in Brooklyn, you're on WNYC. Hello.
Hi, Brian. Happy New Year.
Same to you.
Yeah, I had a tenant like 2 or 3 months ago. She signed a 2-year lease with the understanding that, we're not going to raise the rent, but this will take me through the whole L train shutdown. And it's a good tenant. I would have kept him on, but now I end up with 25 months at the same rate. I'm feeling it a little too. I don't trust Cuomo too much either. So,
Paul, thank you for your story. Does someone like him have any recourse, Emma?
I think there's going to be a lot of renegotiating going on. One of my colleagues is working on a separate story today about the real estate implications, but I know people who've left the neighborhood. One of my colleagues who I sit near said he left, but he was happy he left because he was ready to leave the neighborhood. But I think there's going to be a lot of talks today and in the coming weeks about rents and I think a lot of people are frustrated that they left the neighborhood when they didn't have to. But I will say, one other thing I'm looking into today is this is still going to be disruptive, right? Even if it's just nights and weekends, that's going to be disruptive for people who live along the line. And, if that night and weekend work doesn't finish on time, then there could be repercussions during the weekday commute. So I don't think this is disaster averted, perhaps, but there's still going to be lots of disruption.
And like so many other things, pain is not distributed equally along socioeconomic lines. Like Robert, our first caller, who was calling in, people who work nights and weekends don't tend to be the better off professional class. And so if they do all the work on nights and weekends, of course, they do a lot of subway repairs routinely on nights and weekends. So we know who always gets disrupted. And that would happen a lot to those folks on the L train.
Right. I used to work the night shift. At the times I got off at like 1 a.m. and, there were a few of us standing on the platform who all looked sort of miserable because the trains just aren't that reliable at night. And I think New Yorkers have gotten used to weekend work, but it is still really inconvenient. And this is part of why ridership is down because people can't rely on it at those hours.
Lisa is very happy about this prospect for canceling the shutdown, I think. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Brian. Yep, my husband and I have a brewery, Bridget Tunnel Brewery, on Decatur Street, which is right off the L train. And that's often a selling point for people to come to our brewery because the L train is such a popular train. So we were extremely worried about, what the shutdown would mean. Already it's kind of a struggle to have a small business in kind of an up-and-coming neighborhood, and the brewery scene is pretty competitive. So if this is true, it's a huge relief to us because we cannot stop doing our business. We would just have to kind of limp through and see what happened at the end. So it's really good news for us.
Were you worried about actually going out of business over those 15 months and not being able to make the patch?
Of course, that's always a worry. But because, as we've been in business, this is kind of our third year, and you see the fluctuations throughout the year. In the summer, people go away, or like dry January, like your show yesterday. Yeah. It's a killer for us. So, if a train line just stopped working, and it would even mean some of the young people that are our patrons even, leave because of the inconvenience. We were very worried about what the repercussions would be.
So tell me, are dry January New Year's resolutions a big enough thing?
Terrible.
Yeah? You feel it at the cash register, really?
Yeah, it's a killer for sure.
Thanks for your call. Hope everything goes well.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Cool.
Dan, let's go to an architect who I think wants to be reassuring about the governor's new plan. Curtis on the Upper West Side. You're on WNYC. Hi, Curtis.
Hey, Brian. Good morning. Happy New Year.
You too.
I'm an architect, and we can learn a lot from Europe. It's 20th century thinking that you need just to cover over the old stuff, abandon it in place. It's old, it's bad. In architecture, in renovation projects, we look at this all the time where there's some still good structure. Here's the case in point. There's a tunnel under Park Avenue. Where Park Avenue dips down and it reemerges near the viaduct at Grand Central. That tunnel dates back to 1837, and it's been repaired. And you drive through there in a taxi, and it doesn't seem like it's going to fall apart. I think we could learn a lot from a European point of view of let's keep what works and let's repair what needs to be done.
And the tunnel on Park Avenue, it's got the whole Pan Am building or whatever it's called sitting on top of it, and it doesn't ever collapse. Curtis, thank you very much. I hope you're right. Dan in Queens is confused. Hi, Dan. You're on WNYC.
Hi, you can hear me okay?
Yeah, I can.
Great. Okay, so I have a number of questions that have not yet been addressed. There was a whole article, a very good one, on a website called City Lab that went into all the changes for transit that were supposed to happen, not only effective in April, but this weekend, Brian. The M14 Select Bus service is supposed to begin on Sunday, as soon as January 6th, and we have no idea whether that's supposed to happen or not. The M14 is supposed to begin having more service for buses that is only going to be on 14th Street. The G trains are supposed to be lengthened. More city bikes have been planned. A whole new amount of city bikes has been planned for the city for April. And I'm really curious as to what's going to be happening with these kinds of changes that were proposed, because these are affecting people's commutes on a daily basis.
So, Emma Fitzsimmons, transit reporter for the Times, how much of that do we know the answers to?
We're still learning details, but I believe the mayor was on your show this morning and said that the city planned to keep most of the components of their plan. Yesterday Andy Byford spoke to us briefly after the press conference and said, he wanted to keep added service on the G train, especially if it has, increased ridership ahead of Amazon. And so I think there's some good ideas that the transit officials would want to keep, or that the city DOT would want to keep, but it's not clear yet how all of that will pan out. Byford said said that there was a planned HOV lane on the Williamsburg Bridge with only 3 occupants or more. He said that was likely off. So there's now all of these plans they've been making for the last 3 years are sort of up in the air, and I'm speaking with officials today to find out which are staying.
And again, it relates back to something our first caller, Robert in Queens, was saying about the domino effect. Because of the anticipation of the L train shutdown, there was work on other lines, which was already making his commute more complicated. There was, I believe, expensive station work at Marcy Avenue and Broadway Junction and Court Square. There was work put into the G, as you were just referring to, and the J and the M lines in preparation for the shutdown.
Right. The entire transit system has been moving itself, to prepare for this. I think the MTA would probably say that those upgrades were needed anyway, so it's not a total loss. But I think, there's been so much happening, and there have been weekend closure. I mean, there's already been closures of the L train tunnel to just prepare for the work. So this is going to be a huge undertaking to switch the plans around.
Hey, before you go, I want to ask you about another article that you wrote that I thought was fascinating the other day, called "Why the West Coast is Suddenly Beating the East Coast on Transportation." And it was about how, while New Yorkers are so down on the subway system these days, and the greater MTA system, Metro North and Long Island Railroad, not to mention NJ Transit, that people in Seattle and Los Angeles, of all places, and other cities to the west, not known for their mass transit, are happy with their subways, if that's what they even call them. What's the gist?
Yeah, I thought it was funny. In Seattle, 93% of riders are happy with service, which, if there's any indication of the people who just approach me and complain about their commutes, that's not the case here in New York. But I thought it was really interesting. Polly Trottenberg came back from a trip to California, and she sounded sort of jealous of all the things happening there. And
that's the New York City Transportation Commissioner.
Yes, and I was thinking to myself, why is the New York City Transportation Commissioner jealous of the West Coast? And so, when I started talking with officials out there, they said we have the ballot measure, and voters have been able to directly approve billions and billions of dollars in new funding for new expansion projects, while we know here in New York, we're just sort of trying to keep the existing system running smoothly, and that's been a huge struggle.
Well, we will have to leave it there with Emma Fitzsimmons, transit reporter for the New York Times. Some questions answered, some new questions raised about this possibly canceled L train shutdown that had been scheduled for April. Emma, thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC. Coming up next, we will reveal the winners of the Brian Lehrer Show Best Photo Sitting on Your Phone from 2018 contest.
Well, there you have it. New York Times reporter Emma Fitzsimmons reacting to the governor's announcement back on Thursday regarding the cancellation of the L train shutdown. Of course, she appeared on Friday's Brian Lehrer Show. The L train shutdown is still going on. This morning we had Brooklyn President Eric Adams in Williamsburg, along with Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer and Congresswoman Lydia Velasquez, among others, doing a press conference in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. So, the question of this segment is, and you could post your comments below, did the governor lose 3+ years opportunity of looking for outside consultation? Why he had to wait onto a person in Williamsburg to approach him about this? What do you think? And don't hesitate to post your comments below. So, going forward, the next topic will be another headline that happened last week was that last week, as a matter of fact, New Year's Day, the Fair Fares campaign should have been in effect. But what happened? What will Roy Wilhelm Jr. did wrong? So let's hear the New York City Mayor, Roy Wilhelm Jr., in his weekly appearance on Brian Lear's show on WNYC. This, of course, happened on Friday also. So let's take a listen.
It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning, everyone. And on this first Friday in 2019, getting around in New York City is already making news, just as it did in 2018. Governor Cuomo had his shocker yesterday. You've heard this probably, that the L train shutdown scheduled for April will not happen as planned. We'll talk about that in two of our segments this morning. People are asking what's up with the Fair Fares program that had been scheduled to take effect on New Year's Day. Half-price Metro cards for New Yorkers with incomes below the poverty line. So far, no rollout, no application process. And good news, as last year ended for the Vision Zero program. Traffic deaths were down to 200 for the year, the lowest since they started counting in the city in 1910, though there are some complications with that. Crashes are up, injuries are up, pedestrian deaths are up as a percentage. So we'll talk about that. And with transportation as our first topic, we'll begin on this first Friday in 2019, as we usually did on Fridays in 2018, with our weekly Ask the Mayor segment. My questions and yours for Mayor Bill de Blasio. Your questions can be about anything relevant to the mayor. Our lines are open at 212-433-WNYC, 433-9692, or tweet a question, just use the hashtag Ask the Mayor. Happy New Year, Mr. Mayor. Glad you're doing this with us again in 2019.
It's my great pleasure, Brian. It's been really great, and I'm looking forward to another year together. I want to say Happy New Year to your listeners. And just to say, I know you're going to talk about Vision Zero later on in this broadcast. I want to emphasize 100 fewer deaths on our streets than just 5 years ago. Vision Zero is working. Also, yesterday we announced another record-breaking year for reducing crime in New York City. We're the safest big city in America. Under 300 homicides 2 years in a row. And what's amazing is crime has gone down for 5 straight years. Stop and frisk has gone down. And here's the one I really want to focus on. I hope we get to talk about, Brian. Arrests down 37% and crime going down.
Go ahead, talk about it. Where's that 37% decline in arrests coming from?
Well, here's the bottom line, is that I think we're finding that neighborhood policing is making a huge difference to begin with, because it's changing the relationship between police and community. But also what's clear is that for a long time, the protocol in place led to too many arrests. And we talk about mass incarceration. Let's face it, the origin, the beginning of how anyone ends up being incarcerated is an arrest. And a lot of these arrests proved to be unnecessary. A lot of our laws were not what they should have been, but even the arrests themselves proved to be unnecessary. Under Commissioner O'Neill, what we're finding is we can drive down crime, a lot fewer arrests. We can use summons, we can use warnings, a whole set of other techniques. And let me give you a specific number that I think is particularly shocking. In 2017, 100,000 fewer arrests than 4 years earlier. That number went again down in 2018. I think the bottom line was that it used to be arrest was seen as a goal unto itself. And I'll never forget, Brian, Bill Bratton told me early in his tenure as our commissioner that arrest should not be seen that way. Arrest should be seen as one of many tools that an officer can use if they're trained to use that whole toolbox. And if we're thinking about how to drive down crime holistically, including engaging community partners and working with community leaders like the Cure Violence movement, all of this has come together to show
a whole different paradigm of policing where you don't need to use as many arrests. That has tremendous positive impact. That keeps officers out on the street instead of going to the station house to process an arrest. That costs a lot less money. That obviously reduces mass incarceration.
And you had no way of knowing this, but I was actually going to give you the courtesy of the good news first in this segment on Vision Zero in particular, since it's a matter of life and death. 22 fewer traffic deaths than last year, sinking us below 1910 levels when I think more people got around by horse. So there are also the complexities in this, which we'll also talk about. But what's your Vision Zero report?
Vision Zero is working. That's the top line. We have 5 years worth of experience, and this was a brand new idea. I mean, taking it from zero and building it out over 5 years. What we've seen consistently, every year the number of deaths has gone down. If you're talking about just 5 years, 100 fewer deaths than 5 years ago on a brand new initiative that was unproven, that had to be built from scratch, it says the potential here is amazing. And I think the core of this, Brian, is changing driver behavior. We are in a country, I love my country, but one of the problems in our country is the car culture became so dominant, and drivers got the attitude too often that they could drive their car without having to think about the safety ramifications, particularly in such a densely populated city, particularly with lots of seniors and children and folks with disabilities crossing streets. And it ended up being a situation where drivers were rather insensitive to what was happening around them. What Vision Zero has done is it's woken people up. It's educated people to think very differently. Let's take failure to yield as an example. I know, I've seen it my whole life in New York City. Drivers wouldn't yield to pedestrians, and pedestrians didn't even expect it. Well, now that's being enforced. NYPD is giving out hefty tickets, and when a police officer pulls you over for failure to yield, that educates you, and everyone who sees it is educated, that you actually have to let the pedestrians go first. That's having a huge, huge impact. The traffic redesigns. Look at Queens Boulevard. It was considered, quote unquote, the Boulevard of Death. That was a commonplace phrase in this city. But we had long stretches of time under Vision Zero where there wasn't a single death on Queens Boulevard. So this is about changing behavior, educating people, showing there'll be consequences. Speed cameras. We now have the ability to put in a lot more speed cameras around our schools to protect our kids. You're going to see a lot more of that in 2019. So I think we have something very special here, a policy that just plain works, and now we're going to take it a lot farther.
So deaths are definitely down. There are other crash categories that are up, and we have a caller who wants to ask about some of those. So I'm going to let a caller do it, and it's Pat on Staten Island. Pat, you're on WNYC with the mayor. Happy New Year.
Hey, good morning, Brian. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Happy New Year.
Good morning,
I'm sure you remember my voice from the 2 previous calls I made.
Yes, you're an active listener. I like that, Pat.
And I should remember more, so we give other people a chance. But go ahead.
Much as everybody else.
And what's your question?
My question is now, I know you talk about there was, what'd you say, 22 deaths less than last year, so 9 of those deaths were from the Westside terror attack. I don't know if you remember that.
That doesn't go under Vision Zero. That's not accurate, actually, Pat.
Traffic technicality is like traffic data?
Say again?
He asks, is that not traffic data because the guy drove off the road to do it?
I'll double check, but I do not believe that was, because those were considered homicides. And obviously it was a terror attack, and it was not on a place where a vehicle was authorized to be, so I don't believe that counts.
My question is about the, so that's down, but the past 5 years. And I'm not saying, nothing.
For a regular caller, you don't have a great cell phone, at least not today. So I'm going to ask the questions just for ease of listening for everybody out there. I think I probably have the same questions that you do. Some complexities in these numbers, Mr. Mayor. The number of pedestrian deaths actually went up last year from what I've seen. The number of injuries went up, and the number of total crashes also went up. So what do you make of those things put side by side with the reduction in deaths that is historic?
So one, we have a lot more work to do, unquestionably. It's called Vision Zero for a reason. I mean, the aspiration is to change behavior, change traffic design, create consequences to such an extent that we literally don't have any lives lost. That's what we're shooting for. And, it may sound utopian, Brian, but when in just 5 years' time, we've reduced the deaths by 1/3, I mean, that's a really hopeful sign. So to those very real points, a lot more education, We have a lot more traffic redesign to do. A lot more is coming in this coming year. We put in a lot of protected bike lanes and other traffic calming measures. You'll keep seeing that. So I think there is a cumulative impact. Look, in the end, we don't think every single category always moves perfectly in the direction we want. And these are obviously human lives we're talking about. We want everything to keep, all the crashes, all the injuries to keep going down. We know it's not always going to work perfectly. But I do think the model works, and if we apply it more and more intensely. For example, on enforcement, we're now in a position to take what was a very limited number of speed cameras around schools and greatly expand that. Unquestionably, that's going to change behavior and reduce speeding. We saw the statistics when we had that big debate over speed cameras with the legislature, that in the areas where the speed cameras are in place, the number of crashes goes down intensely, the number of deaths goes down. So there's more coming, and I do think that will reduce the number of crashes. I do think that will protect pedestrians. And I think we have a whole lot of education to do. And that, Vision Zero is still very new in the consciousness, although I think it's a powerful point, Brian, that it's been broadly accepted by the people of the city. And a lot of naysayers thought it would not be. It actually has been embraced, but there's more education to do. The interesting thing is, despite some of the challenges that you raised that we take very seriously, when you look against the national situation, New York City is going in a very different direction than the rest of the country on this, because in so many other parts of the country, the number of crashes and fatalities are going up. Here, it's steadily going down, so something's working here.
Last question on this. If all of these traffic calming measures are being implemented, intersection redesign, slower speed limits around the city, do you have any indications as to why the number of pedestrian deaths in particular went up?
Well, again, we had seen real progress on that, and sometimes it's just tragic specific situations. But I do think this is an area where the education all around is important. One of the things we've recognized in the last year or two, especially when we get to the winter months and the rush hour coincides with the darkness outside, because of the change in the daylight and all that, daylight savings, et cetera. We saw a thing we had not realized early on in Vision Zero, but there's a real serious uptick, and pedestrians are particularly vulnerable in those few months. And we've been doing a lot of education to say to people, be extra cautious crossing streets in that time period, because drivers have not adjusted to the evening rush hour being in light, and suddenly the conditions are much worse. Also educating drivers and creating more police presence. So that's an example of something where we've only been doing that intensely in the last year or two, because we only saw the extent of the problem through research in the last year or two. We'll do a lot more of that. I think that's the kind of thing that's going to help reduce those pedestrian deaths.
And you talked about the number of arrests going down 37%. We have, nevertheless, a skeptical NYPD, I think, arrest question from Steve in Brooklyn. You're on WNYC. Hello, Steve.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Sure.
And, Happy New Year, Mr. Mayor. My question is that, the politics of data is that, data exists to be interpreted. And you look at the revenue of annual ticket summonsing, and it's a staggering $545 million every year that officers are required to meet every year after year. And
excuse me, Steve, that's just not true. That's not true, Steve. I'm going to stop you right there.
Steve,
they're not required
to do that. Follow up. Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
It's just not, Brian, I always want to be responsive to every caller. But I also think all your listeners are trying to figure out what the truth is. And when someone presents something like that that's just plain not factual, once upon a time in New York City, I think there was a real quota system. It was unacceptable and was horrible to the people of the city. It was unfair to the cops, too. Everything that's been doing in the last 5 years, starting with Bill Bratton's leadership, now Jimmy O'Neill, has been to retrain the police force. We are not interested in maximizing the number of arrests. We're interested in driving down crime. We're interested in working with communities to improve quality of life. And that's just absolutely untrue, and there's no evidence of any kind of system like Steve described.
And I'm seeing in the caller notes, Steve, that you're the producer of a documentary called Crime and Punishment, so you're obviously digging into that. How do you want to push back?
We've seen 4 years of staggering evidence that was provided in a historic class action lawsuit by the NYPD 12 versus City of New York that demonstrates the absolute egregious practice of ongoing quotas for arrests and summonses. to this day, this is not something of a bygone era. We've seen reporting as recently as in the recent news in the appeal of a detective that was coming forward as well, and it continues to. When we do screenings of the film, cops continuously come up to us and say, "Thank you. This is something that the department and the city is unwilling to address."
So since the mayor denies that this exists anymore, what's your evidence that it does, or how is the quota system? Maybe it's an informal quota system working as you see it, Steve.
Well, I was curious if the mayor had seen the film and if you had any interest in meeting with NYPD 12, because they possess evidence that demonstrates going up to deputy inspectors, up to the highest echelon of the department, that quotas are being enforced on personnel. Not all precincts. It's absolutely true. And the department is shifting its tone in terms of how it messages, how it trains. That's very true. But one of the troubling notions is that, we're hearing a lot of feedback on the ground from officers that they're still being pressured, because even though the training has shifted and the messaging has shifted, there is still a de facto quota in practice. And I was wondering if the mayor had any interest in seeing the film and meeting with the NYPD 12. I'm sure he's aware of the story of Sergeant Edward Raymond, who was denied.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
I'm sure Steve is speaking from a place of his own beliefs. He's also promoting his film, but happily would have senior members of my team meet with him and see the film and address whatever facts are presented. I never want to look away from anyone who's presenting some information that could be valuable, but his facts on the surface don't make sense. Arrests are down 37% over 5 years. I gave you the exact comparison of 2017 to 2013, 100,000 fewer arrests. The entire training hall, every officer, 36,000 have been retrained. This is not accidental stuff or small stuff. This is a massive sea change. Now, it's true, and by the way, the city council led the way on this, move away from arrest and go to summons as an alternative for illegal activity, and the kind of activity that many neighborhood residents want addressed. And we believe that you don't ignore illegal activity, you don't ignore quality of life problems, you address them, but whenever possible and whenever appropriate, not with arrest, but for example, with summons. So the number of summonses goes up because the number of arrests goes down. That's not because of quotas, that's because of a policy change that reflects the values of the city. Reduces mass incarceration, is better for the taxpayers, better for keeping officers on the street where they can do their job. We just follow the logic here. But I will have my team look at any evidence if he has any evidence. But I've been watching this very carefully. Is it possible some officers are laboring under old assumptions? Sure. Is it possible some supervisors need to be given a clearer message that nothing from the past should continue? I could even believe that might be true, and I'd like to know who they are. But as a question of what's happening citywide in the NYPD, this is an entirely different approach. And if it was the old days, then there'd be a focus on maximum stop and frisk and maximum arrest. Arrest down 37% in 5 years, stop and frisk down 94%. I think that proves that Steve's assumptions are incorrect here.
All right, Steve, you got a promise there that the mayor's going to give you a meaningful rep to watch the film with. So they'll follow up on that. All right, new topic. Governor Cuomo's bombshell yesterday that the L train shutdown will not be necessary after all, at least in its original form, to make the Hurricane Sandy repairs. I see in media reports this morning that you've got questions about this for the governor and the MTA. What do you know, and what do you still want to know?
Well, I had a good talk with the governor yesterday, and look, I commend him for looking for a better alternative. That's a good thing. The state controls the MTA. The governor controls the MTA. I'm glad to see him looking for an innovative approach that would avoid all the disruption and look for the people of Brooklyn and the people of Manhattan who are going to bear the brunt of this. This is obviously wonderful news. There was going to be a huge amount of disruption in their lives, and none of us want to see that. Now, I have to say at the same time, this is not only a brand new announcement, a very new technology, and we need to understand much better what this means and how and when it's going to work, because we should not, in my opinion, turn off all of the efforts that have been underway to prepare for the shutdown until we are 100% certain what's going on. Look, the MTA itself has a kind of checkered history around these big capital capital projects. We all know about East Side Access. We all know about huge delays and cost overruns and other problems. I have to sort of trust but verify here that we are 100% certain it's not going to end up being more like the original shutdown plan. So we're going to keep all the measures the city had prepared waiting in reserve. But if it proves it to be 100% doable, that this new approach can save all this time and hassle, of course it's a good thing.
How much lack of confidence does it inspire? I don't know if you inspire lack of confidence like you inspire confidence. But whatever the right word is, if a no shutdown fix was possible all along, and the MTA just failed to discover that there were engineering firms who could do it that way until last week.
Obviously, the MTA has some real explaining to do here. In principle, this information was available. I'm the first to say sometimes in government you literally do find a new strategy, a new approach, a new technology. I mean, that's not impossible. That stuff can emerge at a certain point that you wouldn't have known a year or two earlier. That's fine. But this is a little strange to me because it has gotten so much attention, so much energy, so much expense already. Years and years of effort. And I want to know more. I want to know for sure that this will work, but also, why on earth wasn't it considered previously? Because if it's out there, let's say this technology's been around for a few years, you would have thought that they would have looked at this before locking in the current plan. So look, I'm hoping that this is really good news that comes to pass, but we're going to be in a careful stance until we're 100% certain.
And one other thing on this, there's breaking news this morning. I saw it on Emma Fitzsimmons' Twitter feed. She's the New York Times transportation reporter. She's going to be on later. That the governor has not secured the approval of the MTA board for this. And he's calling an emergency meeting to get it. The governor always says he doesn't run the MTA because nobody appoints a majority of the MTA board. But he seems to be dictating this. Do you have any reaction?
It's very simple. The governor and the state of New York run the MTA. Every strap hanger should understand it. I think more and more people do. I always say, Brian, I have done 59 town hall meetings, and over the last few years, more and more people ask people who runs the MTA, is it the state of the city? And almost everyone now says state. They understand it now. And I think it's good that there's a clear sense of responsibility. Like I always say, you want to talk about police or our schools or our parks, come to me. But if you want to talk about the MTA, go to the governor. I'm glad he is taking that power and that responsibility and trying to figure out a better solution here. As to the board, clearly, the governor controls the choice of the leadership and controls the budget, and I think overwhelmingly gets support from the board. But it is a true statement to say the board is made up of different people appointed by different leaders, and they should play a board, the kind of role a board should. They should be critical thinkers. They should look at things, ask tough questions, make sure something will work. I think it's important for the board to give this a hard look. But again, I hope when the smoke clears that we have something here that will actually improve the lives of everyday New Yorkers, and that all the folks who were going to have their lives disrupted don't see that disruption.
So on most MTA things, go to the state, go to the governor, but on fair fares, people are coming to you. That's the half-price Metro cards, as you know, for New Yorkers with incomes below the poverty line. You had said January 1st rollout.
Yep.
Where is it?
It's January 4th today. I am precisely 3 days late, Brian. I apologize for that 3-day delay. It's a big new initiative. It's never been done before. And I want to really emphasize to all your listeners, this is the first time in history in New York City that we're going to help low-income people pay less to get around and get the opportunity they need to get to schooling, to get to jobs, job interviews. It's never happened before in the history of New York City. I want to commend Speaker Johnson and the City Council for their leadership. But we also knew when we agreed to it back in June, it was going to take some real work to put together because it's never been done before. Today, we will announce, and I won't go into the details because I'll be standing with Speaker Johnson to make these specific announcements, but we'll announce a plan and start down the road to a whole new era in which we help low-income New Yorkers get out of poverty. And we do something that I think will, be another major step towards fighting income inequality, which is the whole reason I came here. I will note, as I said back in June, my ultimate hope is that when on April 1st, a major new plan is approved to fund the MTA long-term, which is something every New Yorker should care about. This is our last best chance to get a long-term solution for the MTA for our subways and our buses. That plan will include funding for fare fares. I think it should be part of the MTA budget, and then that will allow us to take resources and apply them to other needs in the city. But in the meantime, we're moving full speed ahead, and it's very, very exciting, and a lot of people are going to be reached. And
there are people who say you've slow walked this because you never thought the city should have to pay for it.
I don't know how anyone can say that 3-day delay is. First of all, we said no earlier than January 1st. That was the original understanding because we could not get it up and running before January 1st. We had to have the facts right. I'm very sensitive, Brian, to the fact that some new noble ideas that have come out over the years weren't 100% baked before they were announced, and then there was a lot of frustration when they didn't work. We were not going to let that happen. So we believe that this will be, when we announce today, the beginning of this, that it will go in phases, that each phase will be ready at the date we say. There's no slow walking in the least, and I think it's just disingenuous of anyone to try that. This is a brand new thing. It's going to have a huge impact. I believe in it. If you go back over years, I have said, including on this show, I believe in the idea very much. I always thought it should be funded by the MTA. But we also came to an agreement with the council to move it forward for the foreseeable future because we don't have the funding from the MTA right now. And rather than not take up a good idea and keep building it and keep expanding it, we decided to move forward, and I did that willingly, and my team has put a huge amount of time and energy into getting it right. Remember, the council works with us on the budget and the policy, but then the administration actually has to figure out how to implement it in a way that will help everyday people, and that is effective, is consistent, does not lend itself to fraud, is the most cost efficient. That's what the last 6 months have been about, getting this to work right.
And I know you don't want to upstage your own event with the speaker for later, but can I assume that you will be announcing the exact income levels for single individuals and families to qualify, how people will apply and have to document their incomes, and whether it's for paper ride Metro cards as well as weeklies and monthlies?
I appreciate your good journalistic instincts, and I'm going to say stay tuned in the next few hours. We're going to be giving a lot of specifics out, unquestionably, and we're going to help New Yorkers understand how they can benefit. It's going to reach a lot of people. It's going to be a very important step forward, but I'm not jumping the gun on the announcement.
All right, we'll look forward to this afternoon. Amy in Little Neck, you're on WNYC with the mayor. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Brian. Thanks so much for taking my call. Mr. Mayor, I have a question, and I know you've been asked this before, but I wanted to ask you about the relationship between Amazon and ICE and law enforcement. And when you were asked about this before, you said you didn't know a lot about it. You were going to look into this, and I'm thinking not just about the facial recognition technology, but Amazon's cloud services that they provide, sharing data between ICE, law enforcement, and other government and private agencies. I wanted to see, now that you've had some time to look into this, if you had any thoughts about this. I'm concerned about the city being a sanctuary city, and your stated concern for New York City immigrants, and the contradiction then of inviting one of ICE's largest tech providers into our city.
It's a very fair question, Amy, and I have been looking into it. Let me just preface and say there's some things we know, there's some things we don't know, in terms of access to information. But I'll start by saying, one, I think ICE should be abolished. I think we need a new agency to handle immigration issues and customs issues, because the current approach to ICE is broken and is punitive and negative, destructive, and it must be done away with and start over. So that's a broad point I want to make that I think is probably sympathetic to a lot of your worldview. The second point is Amazon is coming to New York City, and we're going to hold Amazon to a high standard. We're going to hold them accountable for everything they've agreed to in the plan to come here, all the community benefits, all the things they're supposed to do for the surrounding neighborhood and for people who live in public housing, for example. We're going to push them on a lot of other fronts to be part of this community and help contribute to the community and also share the values of this community. So I am, like you, very, very concerned about technology being provided to ICE. What I understand at this moment is that it looks like there is a specific connection between Amazon and ICE, but we don't have enough detail to know exactly what. I think that Amazon should, to the maximum extent possible, explain to people what's going on this. I think that, like many other technology companies, you're seeing this all over the country, the tech companies should start questioning themselves what types of government activity they want to participate in and set some limits on that. They have to put moral considerations ahead of profit. This, and obviously there are other questions way beyond ICE about the technology community providing things that have to be properly, in my view, monitored and regulated. So I am concerned. I don't have details because we can't get them in the public domain yet. I am certainly going to push Amazon to be transparent on this question. And if it turns out that Amazon has a contractual relationship with ICE, I'm certainly going to call for them to end that.
Do you have any leverage since you've already made the deal?
I think it's a misassumption to think that the economic development deal and jobs deal with Amazon reaches into every element of their decision making. I think that's just assuming that this second headquarters is the only thing on their mind, when obviously they're a huge corporation with a lot of other things that they're doing. I think what is doable is public pressure. Again, by coming into New York City, they are now in an environment of intense scrutiny and where there's very clear progressive values, and we're all going to hold them accountable. I want, to see the Amazon experience here in New York City lead to not just 25,000, but potentially as many as 40,000 jobs for everyday New Yorkers, for CUNY grads and kids that come out of our public school, public housing residents. There's tremendous potential positive. But I also think Amazon, in joining our community, has to understand our values. And of course, we're going to be very vocal about recognizing when you say ICE in New York City, you're talking about an affront to 500,000 New Yorkers who happen to be undocumented are being treated in a brutal fashion by ICE. It's something that Amazon should be aware of. Maybe they don't feel that where they are now, but they sure as hell should feel it here. And they should not collaborate with ICE.
And with that, we're out of time for this week. Mr. Mayor, thank you as always. Talk to you next Friday.
Thank you, Brian. Happy New Year.
You too. Brian Lehrer on WNYC. Much more to come.
Well, there you have it. The two segments that we were going to cover for this edition. One, the L Train saga, which is continuing, and the Fair Fares campaign that Warren Wilhelm Jr. announced back on Friday, with about 4 days behind schedule. And unfortunately, Warren Wilhelm Jr. Is out of touch. Because in order to qualify for the Fair Fare campaign, you have to receive food stamps or things like that. So let's go to the articles per se, shall we? First, let's go to the Fair Fares campaign. And this is the article published on AM New York by Lauren Cook. And it says 30,000. So we're talking about approximately, 30,000 people who are receiving PA, or in other words, public assistance from HRA. Actually, this has been going on for many, 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 many years. HRA provides to the participants that engage in seeking employment and or participating in their various job readiness programs that includes FedCap and Back to Work, etc. They have to go to their local HRA office, indicate that if the person, let's say if a person applies for public assistance, they have to go through one of two programs. It could be FedCap. That is a program. Let's go to their website that you guys could have knowledge. This is the one of the organizations that has let's say it's a vendor in the with HRA. And this is the program that FedCap has that's called WeCare. That is focusing assisting individuals to obtain federal disability benefits, encouraging and assisting all participants to comply with HRA and FedCap requirements, and obviously through this program, if a person, let's say, starts participating and they go through all the process, they will receive on their EBT benefit card $32 every Monday to purchase a weekly Metro card to use on New York City buses, on the Not So Nice bus in Long Island, and the Beeline bus at Westchester County. And then in April, around 130,000 will be eligible if you receive a SNAP, or commonly known as food stamp. So those are, in small words, the requirements to participate on the Fair Fares campaign. Of course, the ongoing topic is the L train shutdown. And we have two articles. Let's see the first one. That is regarding Senator.
Government shutdown. Everyone knows President Trump said 25 times that he wanted a shutdown. Democrats and now a growing number of Republicans coming together to open up the government and to pay. Democrats and some Republicans. Democrats and some Republicans are asking President Trump not to hold hostage.
That is not what we're going to talk about. My apologies. Grow the wrong article. Sorry. We have this. From the left to the right, we have Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez. We have Congresswoman Carolyn Malone. We have both Brooklyn and Manhattan Borough President Eric Adams and Gail Brewer, respectively. Here we have Council Member Idalis Rodriguez, Chris Greif from the PCAC. Behind here in the back, we have Alan Shannon, the Assistant Director for the PCAC. And we have the grumpy Trudy Mason, who is the assistant of Carolyn Maloney. And of course, they were this morning at Williamsburg discussing the continuation of L Train saga. And again, the People's MTA won the battle. But of course, they haven't posted anything regarding their victory. But we have to give credit to this organization that this let's say, like I call it, MTA's fiasco won. But I don't think that will be for long. But one question remains. Has Nydia Velázquez, Carolyn Malone, Eric Adams, and Gail Brewer attended MTA board meetings? No! The answer is a big no. And here's why. They could be at Metropolitan Avenue, Lorimer Street this morning, but are they going to go on January 24th for the vote regarding the fare and toll increases? We'll see about that because we're gonna be live from MTA headquarters at 2 Broadway on Thursday, January 24th, reporting all the incidents regarding that vote. And we hope seeing Nydia Velasquez, Carl Malone, Eric Adams, Gail Brewer, and of course, the grumpy Trudy Mason at the MTA board meeting. The time is 6:19 p.m. on this 3 Kings Day from New York City. But one question remains: has Governor Andrew Mark Cuomo did the best ideas during a last-minute attempt of consulting regarding the L train shutdown? Yes or no? Please post comments below for more. And remember, you just heard earlier Emma Fitzsimmons from the Wall Street, the New York Times. Plus, you heard Warren William Jr. regarding the Fair Face campaign. So, do you support Fair Face campaign? Do you think that Warren William Jr. did the best ideas? Please don't hesitate to post your comments below regarding this. So that will be all for our it is 6:21 in the afternoon on this 3 Kings Day. Remember to post your comments regarding the L Train saga and the Fair Fares campaign that we could receive your input. So thank you for joining us on this 3 Kings Day, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your week.